Sweden officially abandoned its century-old policy of neutrality to join NATO in 2024. That might be a disaster with war with Russia on the horizon that the people of Sweden don't really understand. Let's watch a video on that.
Do you want to tell us a few of the things that you've learned?
Well, looking at the history of Sweden, I think quite few of us even could contemplate the fact that we today would be in a situation where we actually hosted a top NATO summit in the south of Sweden. And this is something that's been ongoing, and something that is the culmination of a Swedish endeavor to be the best in the class in whatever we do. And by that, I mean Secretary Rubio, which attended the meeting, lauded Sweden as being a top-notch member of NATO. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Because you see, there was a dual strategy on behalf of Sweden when it came to this NATO meeting. The Swedish Foreign Minister, Maria Malmer Stenergard, publicly aligned with the European allies at the NATO meeting in Helsingborg. And when I mean aligned, she kind of distanced herself from the current American administration on regards to Greenland and Iran and such things. However,
there's a real chance that the Ukraine war turns into a wider European war. And so the fact that Sweden threw away its neutrality, I think there's a chance it might come back to bite Sweden in that they'll get bombed because they're hosting troops and weapons against Russia.
And this is where it gets interesting. She bound Sweden to a US-led framework outside of the NATO and European consensus. And by this, I mean that Sweden joined the Pax Silica about 2 months ago, which Sweden is the first EU member state to do. So we don't really know how this is even going to play out. And secondly, during the NATO summit, we also signed the Technology Prosperity Deal, further deepening Sweden and US bilateral tech ties. And when I mean tech ties, I obviously mean technology closely linked to the military-industrial complex. So this is the way I see it, a sequence of events where Sweden is once again, in order to be top of its class, sidestepping the European Union to secure a privileged position, potentially even weakening European leverage and solidarity in the process, in order to please one of the great power brokers globally, but definitely in Sweden. And here I'm referring to the Wallenberg family, which own the two companies who have the most to gain from this deal. I mean here Ericsson and also Saab. Secretary Rubio even mentioned Ericsson telecommunication company by name in one of the quick doorstep interviews he gave in Helsingborg last week. So as you can see,
he's all just telling what has happened, so nothing really to react to yet.
Endeavor locks Sweden into a very rigid US strategy. And I can't really for the life of me understand
things for Sweden can't go back to being neutral anymore.
And what good it will do me as an EU citizen. But there you have it. Sweden is kind of playing both sides. It's trying to be a loyal European Union member, and at the same time, so eagerly wanting to please the US current government. So it's a situation which might not be clear to everyone, but which I, as a Swede who have been following this for many years now, see as surprising, and I'm disappointed. But I cannot totally write it off, because it's always the Wallenbergs who kind of run Swedish policy when it comes to these matters of industrial geopolitical.
So you have one family, the Wallenbergs, a huge influence over Sweden, like Rothschilds in the United States or something.
Strategy.
Can you explain to our viewers who the Wallenbergs are? I mean, I know a bit about them, and I know about their role in Swedish life going back, well, for a very long time. But I think there is a perception amongst many people, again, it's a legacy of the image of Sweden as this social democratic country, that it's very egalitarian, and that power is very dispersed, and that that there's that there isn't a sort of dominant group of people like the Wallenbergs are. So can you tell us a little bit about them? Because it's something that I find it outside Sweden, very few people know.
Yes, of course, I can. It's Sweden has been very good in marketing itself. We have marketed ourselves, as still do, as one of those wonderful kind of a socialist paradise where everyone is happy and it's a cradle to grave security, and we have Astrid Lindgren and we have Pippi Longstocking, all the rest of it. However, there's always been a situation since, I would say, the 1920s, 1930s, where there have been a very strong family connection between the families of industry and the Swedish governments, no matter if it has been a so-called socialist government or not. And one of the most powerful families here is the Wallenberg family. And its influence, it goes back to the 1920s. And during the Second World War is really when it started to go up. It's a banking family by trade.
Banking family, like the Rothschilds.
There were two brothers during the Second World War. And one brother was basically working with the Americans and the British. And the other brother was placed in Germany. So this family...
good strategy. You bet on both sides, and one side you're sure to win.
Dealt with both sides. And of course, the brother that was placed in Germany was given a slap on the wrists after the war, but nothing much came of it because the Wallenbergs had made themselves indispensable. It's the classic all wars are bankers' wars, and the Wallenbergs were very good at using the situation. So today, their influence operates through an investment company called Investor, and its many foundations holding significant stakes in both Ericsson and Saab among them. And Marcus Wallenberg is the chairman of Saab, and he kind of personifies this link. And in a recent interview, he spoke of building industrial partnerships with a very, very long-term mindset. And this is how the Wallenberg family works. It's a long-term strategy. So you can say there's a 30-year linkage between the Wallenberg also and the current situation. There are public records showing the influence, how they have exercised it through strategic long-term investments and board memberships. So they also established something called the Nordic Compass, which is an industrial alliance, including Saab, Ericsson, and others in the north, in the Nordic and Baltic countries, aimed at strengthening defense cooperation and deep tech competitiveness, a move that kind of cements their central role in this area. Of course, the Nordic Compass is only a formal reason to help militarize the Arctic, but they want the profits from this. So thereby, the Wallenberg family is a classic military industrial bankers family, but they have been highly successful since they have been working out of Sweden, meaning that for many years during the Cold War, they were allowed to work with everyone, because then they worked under the umbrella of neutrality. Now that we're no longer under we're not even assumed to be neutral anymore, they have to firmly align themselves with the Washington agenda in order to keep Ericsson and Saab profitable. And there you have these new signed agreements. So that's basically the Wallenberg working close with the Swedish government, and is in part the reason for Sweden being such a top-notch NATO member these days.
So, in fact, there is a misconception that many people have that it was the United States which persuaded Sweden to change its policy, to put neutrality behind it, to join NATO. There have been very powerful forces within Sweden itself. I mean, not everyone in Sweden, but some very, very powerful forces in Sweden.
Well, you could say that maybe it was some behind the scenes persuading those very powerful forces in Sweden to join NATO.
Sweden itself, that have wanted to redirect Sweden in that direction.
Yes, yes, of course, it's very true. And 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when all this discussion started, the then Social Democratic minister got on a plane and hopped over the Baltic to Finland in order to discuss the possibility of Finland and Sweden jointly joining NATO, or at least they were starting and initiating a discussion.
As someone who lived in Switzerland, nothing has disturbed me more as watching Switzerland throw away its neutrality. It's somewhere that hasn't fought a war in 1,000 years, throwing away its neutrality. Geneva used to be like the place to go to have conferences between warring parties. It was a competitive advantage for Switzerland to have that neutrality. And boy, did it piss me off when Switzerland decided to send weapons to Ukraine, because it means the weapons were nothing. They didn't make any difference. But in terms of Switzerland's reputation, the damage was enormous.
Now, guess who was on the plane with the Social Democratic minister heading off to meet Niinistö in Finland? Obviously, one of the Wallenbergs. They didn't even hide it. It was official. Wallenberg joined the trip to Helsingfors to discuss the future of a possible Swedish-Finnish membership in NATO. Of course, it was already decided by then, but the Social Democratic Party was allowed to go through the official democratic motions before it could be accepted policy. The voters were never asked. It was just a change in the majority in the current parliament, and then we were members by vote in parliament. So as you can see...
Something as important as that, it should really be put to vote to the people, in my opinion.
The Helsingborg summit was the culmination of the hard work that the current Swedish right-wing government have been putting into aligning Sweden deeper and deeper into the United States industrial cooperation.
Has anybody in Sweden, or rather I should say, has anybody in the political system in Sweden understood how dangerous potentially this is for Sweden? Because we now have...
That's the key point.
What, at least from London, from the position I am in London, we have now a very deteriorating security situation in the Baltics. We have a situation where the Russians, having had, I think it's fair to say, a wary relationship with Sweden for a long time, but now have come to see Sweden...
I did tell you that there was an hour and 20 minutes. Just it's still have 20 minutes to go. Sorry. So I'm just going to finish this.
As an outright enemy, where we're starting to see military build-ups by everybody in the Baltics, where we have drones moving around the Baltics. I understand some of them crossing into Sweden itself, though I'm not absolutely sure about this. You can discuss this. But it seems to me that certain financial, private, economic interests are not identical at all with wider Swedish interests, which would be to enjoy the stability and peace that neutrality formerly gave Sweden.
Yep.
Quite. The description is quite accurate, and Swedish media is, of course, uncritically reporting any claim out of Ukraine as a truth. And there is basically no Swedish politician who is discussing the old concept of diplomacy or mutual agreed security agreements, such as Olof Palme once did here in Sweden. That's left the building. Our current Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, in one of the interviews he gave with Mark Rutte in the run-up to the Helsingborg summit, our Prime Minister actually said that NATO should facilitate Ukraine drones getting into Russia. Basically meaning that they should definitely not be shot down while heading over the Baltics, but that he said we should facilitate drones heading into Russia, which is, of course, a conscious rhetoric of blatant aggression. So there is no political... I'm just thinking I have to say the only political disagreement stems from the old Communist Party, the left-wing party in Sweden. They have said that they do not want the DCA agreement. And this is the agreement where Sweden has given up sovereignty in order to host 17 American bases. So the only thing that's happened is that the Communist Party former Communist Party, leftist party, has said, we do not want this agreement anymore. That's the only opposition to the current policy of escalation on behalf of Sweden. So right now, Sweden is, in very many aspects, a warmongering country. We're getting on a war footing. Every day we see and we read the mainstream media news that we need more war graves. We need more dugouts. We need more improvements of civil defense. We just bought 4 French frigates in order to secure the Swedish Navy potential in the Baltic Sea. Why? I don't know, but it's obviously part of the military-industrial profits, once again gaining the upper hand. Sweden is on a war footing, and the Helsingborg summit made that very, very clear. But there is no opposition to this war footing, because the main...
This is in context of several European leaders saying we need to prepare for war against Russia by 2030. And so Sweden appears to be on board with going to war with Russia at that time, because there's war between NATO and Russia in 2030, and Sweden is part of NATO. They're going to be going into war.
Mainstream media is very uncritical in all its reporting.
What about general sentiments amongst the Swedish people? Because, again, Sweden, for most of its recent history, has been a neutral country. It was neutral during the 2 World Wars. It was neutral during the Cold War. To the best of my recollection, that was a widely supported policy across the Swedish public at that time. Is there any sense of regret for the passing of that? Is there any sense amongst the widest Swedish public that they're being pulled into this confrontation, into this situation of conflict and war, without them being properly consulted or having it explained to them?
Sadly, no. The majority in Sweden are in favor of the NATO membership, and I don't think they have realized the effects of the membership yet. They have not really understood it, perhaps, and especially not the DCA agreement, which was run through Parliament totally under the radar. So, but for all of those who viewed Sweden's historic 200-year policy of non-alignment as a moral force for peace and stability in the Nordic region, I would say that the current deep integration into the US-led tech sphere is a very tragic end to that era, period. It's gone. It's not coming back. So, I mean, we're now on a US profit-oriented capitalist ride, where the arms manufacturers fundamentally are altering Sweden's identity and transforming us from a voice of peace into a potential party to conflict.
When you have a strong defense industry, or you tend to be more aggressive as a country. Just look at the United States.
And since it is still a cold conflict, I think many voters in Sweden can't really, because it's quite a complex process to fathom the consequences of a NATO membership should a hot war erupt. But it was also declared during the Helsingborg summit that Sweden is now part of the staging area. In case of a heightened tensions, Sweden is a staging area. It will be the main staging area for the NATO pushback against Russia.
Yes, so Sweden has just volunteered to become the front line against a possible war against Russia. I don't think I need to tell anyone that if you're a frontline state in a war, you get devastated. Just look at what's happened to Ukraine.
Meaning that 60,000 Swedish soldiers will be put into force, and all the equipment will basically be stored and held here in Sweden. And anyone can figure out what will happen to those areas where these stores are kept if it comes to a hot war. Russia obviously isn't going to lean back and say, oh, but Sweden, they're such a nice and neutral country. We've been friends for 200 years. Let them just keep those stores. We're not going to destroy the cities surrounding the stores, which are kept underneath the cities. Obviously.
Yeah, the stores kept underneath civilian areas. Great.
Sweden is going to get hit hard if a conflict, God forbid, were to erupt. And then I think many Swedish citizens will say, why weren't we told about this? But I mean, what's the point of me and the dissident club in Sweden?
Just like there's going to be the mother of all oil shocks this summer, around July. And people around the world are like, why the fuck were we not told it was going to get this bad? And why aren't you doing anything about this Iran situation to their governments? Oh, it's going to be wild.
And saying, we told you so, it won't help, especially since there will be many tens of thousands of dead Swedes, soldiers, and unfortunately civilians if the war were to erupt. So I think it's just a matter of understanding the consequences, because it was never discussed in the media. So therefore, we're still trying to get the people in Sweden to understand the consequences of a war.
Well, Matt, what you say to me, it seems to me that Sweden has moved from being what many people admired as a functioning democracy into one where financial interests, exercise disproportionate power behind the scenes. And from a place which was secure and peaceful to one which is becoming a potential battlefield. Is that a summary of the situation?
Yeah,
it is. It is very much a very good summary, a sad summary, but a very accurate summary. And like I said, add to that the fact that we're tying ourselves into an American market, which is basically not doing that good anyway, and we're locking out Sweden from a Chinese market, potentially. So we're both going to war, and our economy is most likely going to suffer from bad industrial policy. So it's not really a good time to be a Swede right now.
Which is very sad for someone like me, who does indeed remember how Sweden used to be absolutely a moral force. I can remember it very clearly in the 60s, by the way, and the 70s. But that's the Sweden, apparently, that we're seeing left behind. I hope it comes back. Well, Matt, thank you very, very much for joining us. We will discuss developments in Sweden again, I have no doubt, in future. And in the meantime, can I thank you for your hard work, the hard work you and your dissident club are doing in Sweden, and for putting the word out about what the risks that Sweden currently is running. Thank you.
Oh, this was a nice video. It's Sweden, if it does escalate, which we've heard many people in Russia saying we should hit Baltic states, and if it does escalate into a NATO-Russia confrontation, Sweden is going to get pummeled, and by choice. Basically, I think they avoided it taking any damage during 2 world wars, and they're not going to be so lucky this time if there's a hot conflict. And it's sad that they were tricked into doing this, I think, because clearly do not understand the implication of joining NATO right before NATO goes into war with Russia. And if you think this is all, if I'm exaggerating, NATO preparing for war. NATO generals warn of war by 2029. Europe won't be ready until 2035. We must prepare for war with Russia, says NATO chief in stark new warning. Poland prepares for drone war with Russia. Europe's generals are warning people to prepare for war. Europe is expecting Russia war against Ukraine to end by 2030. And the implication of that is that Europe needs to be ready to fight Russia afterwards. In any case, when you have a likely confrontation with Russia in the cards in a few years, it's not a smart time to join NATO and make, especially when you're so near to Russia, you're going to be used as a frontline state. Yeah. So this is a disaster for Sweden. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch, and I'll see you next video. Bye.